Hey, College Success. Welcome to week 4 of the semester, which runs from June 28th through July 4th. I know that after this week, we are halfway through the semester, so hopefully you are getting excited about that the summer session is moving right along. So because we're already in week 4, I'm going to go right to the lessons tab and scroll on down. And as I said, here we go, week 4. In this week, we're going to be in chapters 5 and 6. So you can see here, you're going to go back to your regular 2 discussion posts. So you'll have a chapter 5 discussion and a chapter 6 discussion. So you want to make sure that you post in both of those forums by Wednesday for 100% week 4 attendance, and then respond to 2 classmates in each forum by Sunday to get the rest of those points for that assignment. So I'm going to go ahead and get into the materials, and we're going to go through a quick lecture for chapter 5 and then a lecture for chapter 6. So I have the chapter 5 text pulled up right there. I'm going to go ahead and get the chapter 5 slides going so I can talk to you about chapter 5, which talks about reading and note-taking. And so this is going to talk about different types of reading strategies, and note-taking, and how reading differs from college and the different types of reading within college itself, and making sure that you're taking the best notes possible. So reading and note-taking, the College Reading Learning Association did a study a few years ago. It said that 85% of what we learn in college is done through what we read, which makes sense because oftentimes if you're taking a class, even if it's in person, they say, okay, read chapters 2 and 3 for your test next week. You know, you're reading a lot on your own. And then if you're taking an online class, a lot of the reading is on your own. So much of what you learn in college is through your own reading. And so it really is important to do the reading, but also to be critical in your reading, to be able to kind of identify different sources, to be able to look at thesis and facts and opinions and things of that nature, and to just really make sure that you're practicing, because the more you read, the more strategies you use, and the better it becomes for you in your academic and really anywhere, because you read hopefully all the time. So reading and note-taking, you know, as you become better at both of these skills, they're going to help you in every class. I mean, if you think about it, again, in every class, you're reading in some capacity, some more text than others. And in most classes, you're doing some sort of note-taking. It may not be very formal, but you might jot some things down. Other classes, you may take more formal, full-on notes. So you want to be able to make sure that you're honing those skills. And all of that also comes down to making you, again, a more critical reader, a more critical thinker, enhancing vocabulary, and then just really building on a lot of your other skills that you're learning in your courses. So, excuse me, here is kind of 5.1. The very first section talks about just types of reading. What are the pros and cons of online reading? How can knowing the difference between different types of reading help you? And how can you prepare to read for college in general? So there are different types of reading. Reading to introduce new content, and then reading to comprehend familiar content. So introduce new content would be obviously if you're starting a brand new chapter, a brand new article, a brand new text. Comprehend familiar content, maybe you're reviewing. You're trying to really understand what you've already read and learned. Okay? So what are some reading strategies? So think about, I want you to kind of just think on your own, what do you already do that is part of your reading routine that allows you to be successful in your reading? Or maybe what should you start incorporating? We're going to talk about some active reading strategies here in a minute. So when we are talking about effective reading strategies, here are some things that you need to be thinking of. Allowing adequate time for reading. And of course, in your textbook, I have this pulled up. All of these are going to go into more depth here. So I always, lecture on it, and then I always recommend, go back and look at this a little bit more in depth, because it's always going to give you more details here in the textbook than it is in the overview slide here. But allowing adequate time for reading. So for instance, if you have a 20-page article and it's on a topic you are not familiar with at all, you can't expect to get that done in 10 minutes. You need to plan an appropriate amount of time to read. Determine your reading speed and pacing. So when you have that 20-page article and you read it, just time yourself. Know how long it's going to take you so that you can plan accordingly in the future. Are there certain reading requirements that you have to do for certain classes or majors? So be aware of that. Schedule set times for active reading. So when we say active reading, the textbook and reading researchers, they mean you're not just glazing your eyes over the paper to say, yep, I've read it. You are really being active in your reading. You're setting a purpose. You're setting goals. You are chunking your reading. You are going back and rereading if something didn't make sense. You're going back after you read a section and you're taking notes or you're highlighting. And you're going to practice recursive reading strategies. So that's what, again, here goes into more depth. And then here are recursive reading strategies. So recursive means things that you do, every time. It's kind of like a process that you go through. So things like that, assess your prior knowledge. Okay, what do I already know about this topic? What do I remember from a previous class? What do I need to maybe set some baseline information for? Because the more that you connect with what you already know, the more kind of schemata is being formed, bridges are being formed so that you can make those connections and make it easier for you to take in new information. Ask questions, want to either look to see what the textbook has asked or ask your own questions. Try to infer what the textbook is saying. Learn new vocabulary, evaluate what you've learned, and then apply it to whatever situation you are in. So again, the text is going to go into detail on each of those areas, but all of these are going to connect back to active reading. You really want to make sure that you're taking time before you read, while you read, and after you read to really get involved in the reading process in particular. Because I always like to tell my students, reading is a process, much like writing is a process. You don't just sit down and write your first draft the first time and it's golden. You turn it in, you're good. No, you have to go back and rewrite and draft and peer review and edit. Just like reading, you're not going to understand something the first time you read it. You're going to have to go back and reread and take notes and answer questions. So you want to make sure that you are active in those strategies. So the next section talks about, making sure that you really are applying, again, those recursive reading strategies. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how to apply these and how to really be active, again, in that reading process. I know that phrase I'm saying multiple times, active reading, but it really is an important part of the entire reading process. So what do we do here? So here are some of these strategies. So skimming, and again, here we're going to go a little bit more in depth. So maybe I'll scroll through here. So skimming is not just like a real quick look over. It really does let you look to see kind of how is the section set up? What's in bold? What's in a table? What are the headings and the subheadings like? You're really trying to look to see how the chapter or the text or the article, whatever it might be, is set up so you can start getting that prior knowledge ready to go. You also want to use some different active reading strategies, and here are some examples of active reading strategies. So I like the SQ3R because this really does model exactly what active reading should be. So here's what each of those stands for if you've not heard of this before. Survey is kind of like skimming. It's like a preview, looking to see, how many pages is this? Because that helps you plan your adequate time. How many pages is this? What's in bold? How is this set up? Is there a summary? Are there end of chapter questions? So really getting a chance before you even sit down to read to look it over. And this really usually only takes a few minutes, but it does a lot to aid in your overall comprehension. Question means, what questions, maybe did the textbook already set these questions aside? Did your professor set them? Should you go through the headings and the subheadings and create questions? Because that helps you keep on track. If you know you have questions to answer, you're actively looking for those answers. Next, you read. So you read it. If you have a 20-page article, I wouldn't recommend reading all 20 pages at once. You're going to maybe 5 pages at a time. That way you get to page 5 and you're like, okay, I've been lost since page 2. Well, you only have a few pages to reread versus if you read all 20 pages and realize you've been lost since page 2, you have a lot more ground to recover. So read in sections or chunks so that you can go back and reread as necessary. And do not highlight or take notes or underline while you read. You're going to read the section and then go back and take notes or highlight or underline. Because as we read, we tend to think everything's important. And so we highlight way more than we should. But if you read, stop, and then go back and be like, all right, what was really the key points here? Then you're highlighting more purposefully. Recite means to read it, really to say it out loud. So to say a sentence out loud that's confusing, to read a vocabulary word out loud that's confusing, to summarize out loud. There's a lot of reading research that's been done, again, through the College Reading Learning Association, from Reading Research Quarterly, all of these different reading journals that say reading out loud really does aid in comprehension. And then finally, review. Reviewing is taking time, that evening, the next day, the next 2 days, to really go back and just refresh your memory, revisit anything that was confusing, revisit the main points, because that is going to even further help your comprehension. Okay, so that goes over those active reading strategies. And if you're not doing one of those, maybe you don't take some time to survey or preview. Start building that into your routine, a little bit at a time. Build these things in to see if you can see a difference in your comprehension. Okay, so there are different strategies for reading in college. Again, this goes into more depth. You're going to be reading different types of sources, both primary and secondary. You'll be expected to use those as part of your research, as part of your understanding. And so this section goes into how to attack those different types of readings. What's the most beneficial way? Also, just knowing the topic and the author. Sometimes you're going to have to find your own topic in a particular class for a writing assignment, or maybe you already have a topic assigned, you have to find the information out there. And so knowing about the topic and researching the author, knowing their credentials, knowing how reliable, how trustworthy, how credible they are is all key, as well as to being a critical reader. And so this section will go into a little bit more of detail on how to do that. Also, knowing your own biases. We all have biases. It's inherent. What the key is not letting those biases affect decision-making or affect how you take in new information. So a critical reader can read something that is not necessarily aligned with their own beliefs and not reject it right away, but they can read it to try to understand it. And sometimes what it does is often makes your own argument stronger because you understand the other side so much better. So trying to really set your own biases and preset ideas aside so that you can be open-minded and take in that information. So as it kind of starts wrapping up here, can you think of any time you've struggled with reading content? If so, can you start employing these type of strategies? We do have reading classes on campus. We have critical analysis and technical comprehension, so they are reading specific classes. Some of you are taking them now, or you've taken them in the spring semester. You might be taking them in the fall. So really honing in and knowing what kind of strategies can help you and knowing where to go to get those resources. All right, then the next section starts transitioning to our note taking. So making sure that if you're taking notes, because again, I recognize that not everyone has to take notes. Sometimes you are so strong in your audio skills, in your audio preferences, that note taking might be a waste of your energy. So you may only be jotting things down every once in a while, but there are some people who really do need to take notes. So are you taking the most effective notes possible? So how can you do that? Well, you have to first be prepared to take notes, which might sound strange, but there's stuff you have to do ahead of time. And then what kind of note-taking system are you using? So how you prepare to take notes and knowing your best method are going to set you up for successful note-taking. So here are some things that, think about real quickly. Do you have a way that you take notes? Why do you use it? Is it effective? And if it's not, should you try something different? So you should be taking notes in a way that are organized for you. So I'm going to go ahead and go to this section here. So how do you make sure that you are taking good notes? Well, again, first you have to be prepared, meaning you have to bring materials to class. You might have had to read before class. You have to know your note-taking preferences. So those are kinds of things that you should know. And this talks a little bit more about how to be prepared to take notes. Now, what are the different note-taking methods? And this is going to go through Some examples here: Cornell, outlines, charts, concept mappings, shorthand, and annotating. So what are Cornell notes? I personally like these a lot because I like things to be really organized. And so this shows you, and this screen over here is going to show it a little bit bigger, how to set up your notes so that it is really organized. And the reason I like this is because in this column here, you pose a question or a vocabulary term or concept. And then on this side, you answer the question or define the word or go into more detail. And for me, it kind of sets up like a study guide. So it really helps me stay organized with my thoughts and allows me to get prepared for potential assessments. And then you summarize and put things into your own words. So this goes over a little bit more of those Cornell note-taking methods. Okay, and what you can include in those. And then you have outlines, which a lot of people associate with writing, but outlining is also a reading strategy. So how can you set up your notes in a way that makes sense for it in an outline? This will talk to you about that. Some people like a more visual format, which is where charts or tables can come in. And this also can make a difference on the content area. A chart or a table is not always going to make sense in every single content area. Also, visual concept mapping, visual note-taking. I've had students who they like to doodle and they find that doodling distracts them, but if they can hone their doodles into like a note-taking method, into a visual format of some sort, that can help them. So you can concept map or you can do like a storyboard type thing to allow you to see things in a more visual format. Also, maybe you need to come up with some shorthand. So this is an example of shorthand. Sometimes you have symbols. You can shorten some words as long as you know what your system is. And then taking annotations back after you take notes. So you take your notes and then you go back and you revisit. Like this one is kind of looking through and annotating, making little notes and putting down some comments on those notes. So going back and filling in, did you miss anything? Should you have paid more attention to a certain component? So all of that is important. So that's what these couple slides talk about as well. So they give you some more information on Cornell notes, how to really set it up, the benefits of it. Here's the outlining slide, the chart or table, concept mapping. There's that shorthand, annotation after note taking. And then this is going back to that active reading process, tying that back in, reviewing. Go back to your notes and look and make sure that they're complete. You need to maybe go back and fill them in. I always recommend to my students to, if you have chapter 5 coming up, in class next week, read chapter 5 before class, take notes on it. And then when you get to class, you can really listen for the key points or anything that maybe didn't make sense when you read it on your own. So you want to make sure that you're kind of viewing your note-taking is in a cycle as well. All right, and here's just a quick summary and then some questions to think about, which are part of your pre and post-test survey in the assignment folder, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So that is chapter 5. Again, I always recommend, going into the text and spending a little bit more time, get some more details, particularly maybe if you know that you are weak in your note-taking or you're looking for a new strategy or you want to learn more about reading strategies, go back and visit and spend a little bit more time there. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and pull up. Chapter 6 is already up and going. I'm going to pull up the chapter 6 slides here. Chapter 6 is about study, memory, and test taking. So real quick, self-analysis. Where do you rank yourself on these 4 questions? And these are the things we're going to be talking about in chapter 6, talking about kind of the importance of memory, how to effectively study, and test-taking strategies. So in the first section, your memory. Do you know how memory works? Do you know the difference between working short-term memory, how to best remember things so that you can then pull it out of your long-term memory? So that's what this section is going to focus on. So here is kind of you've probably seen this before. This is the basic steps of memory. You encode something, meaning you see it, you hear it, you read it. Something along with your senses allows you to take in information. Now you store it, meaning maybe it's just in your working memory, like it's right there for just a little bit. Short-term memory, next few hours, maybe a day or so, to long-term memory. And then retrieval. how do you get it out of long-term memory? Because technically we can remember information forever. Our brains have that capacity. What we don't always have the capacity for is retrieving the information, because if we don't practice getting the information out of our long-term memory, it just gets buried. And so that's why it's really important to not only organize your information that you're learning in a way that makes sense, but also practice retrieving it so that it's more easily done. So, all right, so here are our types of memory: working, short-term, and long-term. So if I go into here, I'm going to have some activities. Let me scroll up, sorry. So this talks about your working memory. It's a type of short-term memory, but it's like when you're actively doing something. It's your working memory. It literally is working at the moment. Your short-term memory, again, is kind of what it sounds like. You know, the next couple hours, the next couple days. It's not quite in your long-term memory yet. And then you have your long-term memory. It's things that go on forever. You know, if you've ever, sometimes people will say like smell is a really good trigger for a long-term memory retrieval. So maybe you're somewhere and all of a sudden you smell something and it takes you back to your childhood, you know, because we can remember things forever. But your long-term memory is where your information goes for a permanent amount of time. But again, we want to make sure that we can recall that information, retrieve it. So what happens? Why can't we always remember things? Well, sometimes we don't get enough sleep, and sometimes we cram information and it's not going to stick. It might help us in the short term. Some people will say, well, I cram and then I do really well on a test. Well, yeah, because when you cram that information, you know, the night before, it's still in your short-term memory. So it's right there, easily accessible. But if you cram and then a month later there's a unit test, that information probably not going to be there anymore because you crammed it, you didn't really take the time to work with the material, and it's not going to be in your long-term memory. So sometimes you do have to memorize information, and so that's what chapter 6 will talk about. You know, often memorization is important. Other times you want to make sure that you're spending more time really understanding and applying the information, because when you are cramming, usually you're just memorizing the information. You're not necessarily understanding it at that deeper level. Okay, so we are going to do a memory activity as one of our assignments this week, but I encourage you to spend a little bit more time in this section if you want to know more about how your memory works, or if you've struggled with memory issues in the past in general, like how does memory work, and that can help you understand how to improve it as well. So closely connected to that then is your studying, because obviously you want to remember what you studied to be able to apply it later. So what strategies are you using? What's beneficial to you? And how can we make sure that we're getting the most out of our study time? Well, we want to make sure that we are not distracted. So here are some myths also with studying. You can multitask while studying. Yeah, you can, but it's going to present problems. Highlighting main points of a text is useful. Yes, it is, but some people highlight way too much and it almost becomes obsolete. And studying effectively is effortless. No, there's a lot of effort that goes into that. So this part right here will talk to you about the importance of avoiding distractions. A lot of people allow devices in particular to distract them, or other people to distract them. So making sure that you have the right physical and mental space to study is important. But then also making sure, again, that you're setting up that environment, that study space, and they kind of have those compare contrast pictures there. And this goes into those myths again, how some people view studying. So it debunks kind of these study myths. So now let's talk about some study strategies. This is going to go over mnemonics, concept association, and idea clusters. So I'm going to keep flipping back here because I feel like these show it a little bit better. Mnemonics. So here are some really familiar mnemonics, hopefully PEMDAS in math, you know, Roy G. Biv for the rainbow, Holmes for the Great Lakes. My son right now is, he's going into 5th grade, and we do like lessons over the summer to practice. And we're talking about the solar system and different, you know, all the planets, and he's learning them in order so he can remember them in order from the distance of the sun. And we're doing mnemonics to get there. And he's learning about like the different moons and the different planets. And so we're using mnemonic devices to help him remember that. So these are usually like kind of catchy or, you know, helpful. And that is one way to study if it fits. Obviously, not everything can go to mnemonic, but that is one strategy. Concept association is kind of what it sounds like when you connect concepts together. When you put them together, you associate them with like an example in your own life, you associate them with an example or an issue or something you learned in a previous class or textbook. Idea clusters are, again, kind of similar to mnemonics, but they're ways to recall information by connecting it to other information that you already have. Here are some more effective study strategies in general. Spacing, this is when you study. So making sure that you're not cramming, but if you know you have a test next Monday, every night you should be studying a little bit, maybe 10 minutes tonight, 20 minutes tomorrow night, half an hour. So you're really making time to plan deliberately your studying. Interleaving is what you are studying. It's like what you're studying, and this is what this schedule shows right here. So maybe you're rereading certain chapters, and you can see here, you're rereading more chapters. Here you're rereading your notes. It's all in the same topic, but you're doing different things with the material. You're studying it in different ways. And then you want to make sure that you're practice testing. This is the retrieval part. So it goes back to your memory. You want to retrieve the information. So you want to get some flashcards. You want to get in a study group. You want to do Quizlet. You want to make a practice test. You want to read the information out loud. So this goes back to practicing how to get the information out of your long-term memory. And if you are studying and you're doing it in mnemonics or you're putting them into idea clusters, you're organizing them in such a way that makes it easier for your memory to retrieve them. I always think, it's kind of cliche, but the file cabinet idea. If you just throw files inside a file cabinet with no real sense of organization, it's going to be difficult to find what file you need when you need it. But if you can file them in a way that makes sense, it's going to be easier to retrieve those. So if you can file information, in mnemonics and it makes sense to you, it's going to be easier to retrieve. You also want to make sure that you are just really aware of what study strategies you use and if they're working for you, and if not, what can you do to improve them? So this talks about, again, those different study strategies and making sure that you know what is best. Sometimes you're going to have to vary it as well, based on maybe the instructor's teaching style, the content of the course. You're going to have to kind of shake it up a little bit. All right, and then the last section goes into test taking. So making sure that you are, again, this all fits together, making sure that your memory and your study strategies work together to help you with your test taking. So what difference is between test prep and the actual test? Are you doing a whole person approach? And then test anxiety, which is a big thing. So good study habits are those things that, you've probably been talked about since a young age, but you want to make sure that you're putting them into play. And I'm going to bring up again, because this gets a little small, I'm going to go over here. So you want to make sure that you're doing these good study habits preparing for the test. So here's the 10 things that you should be doing. Making sure you're reading everything. Obviously, you can't really know what's going to be on the test if you haven't read your assigned readings. Go to class. A lot of discussion and extra things will be discussed there. Take notes in whatever format is going to help you. Review those notes, study, space out your studying, go back and reread, maybe do a study group, practice retrieving that information, study guides, flashcards, practice time writing. So if you are going to be taking an essay test, time yourself, know how long it's going to take, and then sleep, eat, all of that kind of common sense stuff. So that's all you do for test prep. Those are things you do before you even really start thinking about the actual test. These are things you should be doing all the time, and then they also happen to help you with the test. So what should we do when we actually start to take the test? So first, you want to make a whole person approach, and this talks about how you can't turn off your life to study for a test, because you still have a job, you still have a family, you still have other responsibilities. So you have to be aware of that so that you can work your study time in with your life. And this is going to talk about, making sure that you have realistic expectations. Do you need accommodations? Were you on a 504 or an IEP? Because if so, you can have something similar at the college level. Making sure that you know the test situation, that you're aware of any test prep sessions, if you're aware of the test format itself. If not, ask. Ask the instructor, is this short answer? Is this multiple choice? Odds are they're already going to tell you, or if they ask, they'll let you know. Also, maybe kind of looking at your testing apps. Are there any apps that you can use? I know a lot of people, and I've already mentioned it, like Quizlet, but there's also different types of testing apps, and they give some examples there. The day of the test, again, you want to make sure you get there early, take some deep breaths. I have some students where they like to get there early, get their area set up, and then go for a little quick walk around the hall because it relieves a little stress. Make sure you come prepared, all those, again, kind of common sense type stuff. Some taking the test and how you prepare for the test also should depend on, if it's multiple choice, if it's fill in the blank, that kind of thing. But you want to make sure that you listen not only for the written directions, but the oral directions as well. Scan over the test, make sure you're familiar with it, read the directions again, read the directions again, read the directions again. I say that because I have graded so many tests where simple points are missed because the directions were not really read. Look and see how you're going to spend your time. Look and make sure you answer every question on the exam. Read the entire question. Even if you think you know what the answer is, read the entire question just to make sure. Skip the difficult questions, or if you have like a moment where you go blank, and go back to it and make sure that you have taken the entire test. And then only change your answer if you are 100% certain. About 75% of the time, we change right answers to wrong answers. So you only want to change the answer if you have a good reason to change it. Now, when you're done with the test, you want to make sure that you kind of control that test anxiety, knowing that, okay, the test is done, but you want to also kind of take deep breaths and think about how the test went, but also give yourself some space from it, because when you get the test back, that's the time to do a lot of reflecting. So test anxiety can cause us to doubt ourselves, and we have to really work on, controlling that test anxiety. So let me scroll down here to this section of test anxiety because it is so common. So you want to understand why we get test anxiety. What are the symptoms of test anxiety? We kind of go into this like fight or flight mode. And that's why our brain goes blank sometimes, because we literally are going into fight or flight, which is a different part of our brain. And so it decreases our chances of that critical thinking. So understanding what happens when test anxiety, and then what can we do to manage test anxiety. So this is going to talk about that. There are resources on campus, obviously studying, preparing, deep breaths, good meals, nice rest. Those are all ways to kind of combat test anxiety as well. And the reason we do this is because while you might not take like a paper pencil test in your field, you still are going to have like a real life testing situation. So these are good preparations for what you're going to do in the future. All right, so again, as I said with chapter 5, in chapter 6, I would recommend going back and paying a little bit more attention to any of those sections that you really need a little bit more attention to. So now let's talk about what you're doing this week in terms of assignments. So here is your chapter 5 skills survey. This is the pre and post. Again, seeing how you feel about something before you really go through and look at the test, and then the chapter, and then how do you feel, where would you rank yourself after? All right, here's your chapter 5 discussion. As a reminder, 150 words or more. Post by Wednesday for week 4 attendance, along with the chapter 6, and then responded to classmates by Sunday. So it says, imagine you're given a chapter to read in your American history class about the Gettysburg Address. Write down what you already know about this historic document. How might thinking through this prior knowledge help you better understand the text? So I'm not asking you to go to Google and find out more about it. That's not what we're doing. You are just going to write down what you already know about this document, and how might knowing what you know help you as you prepare to read a chapter on this particular concept. So this goes back to that reading process of activating prior knowledge and thinking about what you already know and making connections. Okay, your chapter 5 assignment. Now there's a link. You're going to read this article. It makes you sign up for an account. It's free, but I didn't like that. So I took it into this Word document right here. So you're going to open up the 7 deadly sins of students. It's going to open up into a Word document. And you're going to go ahead and read this article. Again, I took it from the web page in case you had any problems with the web page. So you're going to go ahead and read this article, and it's, again, the 7 deadly sins of students. So spend some time. If you need to print it out, you certainly can, or you can make notes on it, or whatever your preference is. Once you've read it, you're going to pull up the Chapter 5 assignment, which is right here, and it's going to ask you a series of questions. And remember, Chapter 5 was on the reading process, and so this is going to ask you to read and then answer the questions. So what is the author's thesis? A quick reminder, if you're not sure what a thesis is, it's the author's main point, a one-sentence summary. What's the summary of this article? What's the author trying to teach you? And where is it located? Sometimes thesis statements are not directly stated, but this is asking specifically where is it located. So pay attention to see, what is the author trying to teach their reader? What is the main point they're trying to make? And it's a complete sentence. How would you describe the author's tone? How do they feel? Are they happy? Are they angry? Are they sarcastic? Are they critical? So what's their tone, and why would you think that? How effective is their argument? They're trying to make a point. It obviously has something to do with the 7 deadly sins of students. So what's their point? Is it effective? Do you see any weaknesses? Do you see any strengths? Do you agree with the author? If you were to write a rebuttal, if you were to try to maybe give the other side of this author's argument, what points would you make? And what are some of the deadly sins of teachers and professors? So your turn to flip it. What are some deadly sins of teachers and professors? So when you're done reading that and filling that out, you'll just click in here and you'll submit it, just like a Dropbox. And this is due by July 4th, which I guess is a good time for me to remind you all that even though it's a holiday weekend, your assignments are still due July 4th. Technically, the college is open because we're online, and the college is observing July 4th on Monday. So July 4th is still your deadline for these assignments. So please make sure that you are submitting them when they're due. Okay, so that's a Chapter 5 assignment. And then you have your Chapter 5 quiz and Dropbox. So let me pull up, I thought I had it down there. Chapter 5 quiz. And this is going to be just like your other ones. Make sure you respond to each question in 2 to 5 complete sentences. So this talks about reading and social media. So do you think social media is having a positive or negative effect on reading? What kind of reading do you do on social media? Question 2 talks about our personal biases. How do you think your personal biases affect the way that you read, affect the way that you interact, in an academic sense, of course. Question 3, it says under section 5.2, under allowing adequate time for reading. I'm going to show you where that is real quickly. So 5.2, right down here, this section right here, it says that there are several quotes about the importance of reading. Select one of the quotes and explain what you think it means and why you agree or disagree. So this paragraph right here has a lot of quotes. So that's what they're talking about. Question 4 talks about the Cornell notes. So this is really just asking you about your note-taking techniques. And then question 5 talks about your learning preferences and how it kind of relates again to your reading habits. So again, when you're done with your quiz, make sure you save it and you will submit it and Dropbox it by Sunday the 4th. All right, here is your Chapter 6 skills survey, pre and post. Here's your Chapter 6 discussion. Again, make sure you post your original response by Wednesday to get the rest of your Week 4 attendance points. 150 words or more. Take a few minutes to list ways you create memories on a daily basis. So this is the memory chapter. Do you think about how you make memories? Do you do anything that helps you keep track of your memories? So maybe if you jot things down, or you do a lot of journaling, or you post a lot of pictures, so you can go back and look at them. Talk about your memory process. Here is your memory assignment. Chapter 6, test your memories. You're going to open this up, and this is going to open up into a Word document. There are 3 steps to this. Step 1, look at this list of items for 30 seconds, cover it up, and then after you've stared at it for 30 seconds, jot down as many of the words that you can remember. Then part 3, answer these 3 questions. How many words were you able to remember? Which words did you forget? And what memory techniques did you use? I'm not going to grade you on, oh, you only remembered 5 words. No, it's really just an activity on memory exercises. So look to see, while you're trying to memorize that for 30 seconds, Are you using mnemonics? Are you using idea clustering? Are you using like an association? Are you just repeating? So that's kind of what you're doing with this, jot down how many you remembered and then answer those questions. When you're done with that, save it, submit it, and Dropbox it by the 4th. Finally, Chapter 6 quiz. So pull this one up. So this is talking about your test taking. What kinds of questions, test formats have you had? Do you have a preference? Do you do better in certain kinds of tests than others? Question 2 talks about test anxiety. Have you experienced it? What do you do to help manage it? What could you do better to help manage it? Question 3 is talking about just in general your memory. What kind of things do you do well with memory? What kind of things do you struggle with? How important will memory be in your field? Question 4, so far, I know we're only a couple weeks in, but studying for college, is it different than high school? How are the tests different? And some of you may not have had any face-to-face classes in college yet, so you can talk about that, and that's okay. And then question 5 talks about, again, your test taking combination a little bit with your memory, so reflecting on your test taking. And again, when you're done with that, save it and Dropbox it. All right, so let's do a quick recap. Chapter 5 discussion and Chapter 6 discussion are both due by Wednesday for week 4 attendance. Make sure you are posting in both to get full week 4 attendance. Respond to 2 classmates in each forum by Sunday. Then you want to submit your Chapter 5 assignment on the 7 deadly sins, your Chapter 5 quiz, your Chapter 6 assignment on test your memory, and your Chapter 6 quiz all by Sunday, July 4th. Again, even though it's a holiday weekend, everything is still due right on time. If you have any questions, let me know, and I hope you do enjoy the week and have a safe 4th of July weekend. Bye.